Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology. And today I'm joined by my wife, Ashley, who is here to talk to us about some herbal helpers that we might use during this upcoming Mercury retrograde, during this current Mercury retrograde. We're recording this just before Mercury turns retrograde. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But before I dive into that, I want to remind all of you that I am currently on the campaign for my upcoming program, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. Check it out on my website, nightlightastrology.com. Click on the courses page, go to the first year course. You can learn all about it. We are starting just in a couple of weeks. It's a brand new program. It's a great time to start studying astrology. There's a lot going on this year in terms of the movements of the planets that I think could go really nicely with the study of astrology, especially the Uranus Saturn square, which can really lead to important changes in our thinking. And I think studying astrology can be one of them. But so can studying herbs. And my wife is someone who has been teaching herbalism, working with the plant spirits for a long time. So I'm really happy to have her here today to talk to us about some a particular plant spirit that we might work with during this upcoming Mercury retrograde. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I love it's. We were talking about this earlier that it's been probably a full cycle since we've actually done one of these talks together. So, yeah, it's nice to come back and find ways that the plants can support us, through some of these more challenging transits.
Yeah, absolutely. Mercury retrogrades are really common. We have three of them per year, but it is uncommon for there to be a Mercury retrograde in the same sign as the sun when the sun is being eclipsed, which is what we have this June of 2021. So, in addition to that, we also have a very powerful Mars Pluto dynamic coming up. We've got Uranus square Saturn again. So it's a time where our mind might be getting blown a little bit by some of the transits. Our thinking is changing, our way of being is changing. We're learning new ways of communicating with ourselves, with others during a Mercury retrograde. I want to focus on that today because I know that the plant spirit that you have to tell us about today is especially good at supporting our minds, our nervous systems, communication in the body and outside of us. So tell us a little bit about the plant that you have in mind that might be a good helper. And also maybe you could include how we could use this or where to find it or what the best way of taking it might be.
Sure. Yeah. I think with Mercury being the planet of communication and ruling the nerves and the nervous system, and I think, like you mentioned, there's going to be a lot of information coming in and a lot of mental and physical dexterity that we're going to have in these coming weeks. The plant that came to mind was rosemary. Rosemary it's one thing I like about it is that it's a pretty easy to find plant. It's something that you can pick it up at your grocery store, in those little packets and the where you have fresh herbs. A lot of people grow it. Here in Minnesota, a lot of people grow it in their yards. And so you can just sort of walk by and grab a sprig. But it's a pretty easy to find plant. And I really, I really like it for this because it helps ease communication and move energy. And so, something that can happen, I think, during retrogrades is sometimes we can kind of get stuck on a certain thought, maybe something that didn't go well, it didn't go the way we wanted it to. And we can get kind of stuck into that. And that can stop us from actually processing and moving forward. And rosemary just breaks things up. It's a heating herb, it's a diffusive plant. So it really, if you think about the needle like leaves, I have an image of it here from a book called Flower Power by Anne McIntyre. You can see it has these sort of needle-shaped leaves. And in the doctrine of signature, these needle-shaped leaves are a combination of fire and air elements. So fire and air elements, we can think about fire heating, activating, igniting, transforming, and air as movement and information and energy. And so this plant has a really nice combination of fire and air. And so it can really help move information within the body. So it's really good for digestive stagnation and stuckness. It's also a long-time remedy. People don't know this, but it's also a long-time remedy for anxiety and depression and for mental illnesses to help clear the mind. And we know that the mind and the body are connected. And so if we can work either from the belly up or from the brain down, we're going to have some benefit for the body. And so rosemary will just clear up any stagnation. It removes phlegm, which is another type of physiological stagnation, but just more, in terms of the mental processing piece. I just feel like rosemary is going to add some wind and fire to whatever it is you're working on to help it disperse and to take its course of action in the way that will be most beneficial.
If you had to describe the personality of Rosemary, I mean, one thing that I've always loved about your work that we share in common with our background is the idea that, these plants that we take in, that they're people. They have personalities and character to them. You've worked with rosemary a bunch. I think a lot of people look at rosemary and they think, isn't that just like a spice or a cooking herb or something like that? Like, what's the personality of rosemary if you had to describe at least your interactions with rosemary in terms of taking it in and kind of getting to know it as a personality?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it's a tough plant. I mean, it grows in the Mediterranean. And if you've ever seen it growing out in California or in more arid climates, I mean, it is tenacious. It will cling to rocks. It barely needs any, minerals. You can grow it in sand. So it's one of those plants that doesn't need a lot of nutrients to thrive. It does actually quite well in barren soil. So it's a strong plant. It's tough. Even if you try to break off a sprig of it, it's really hard to break it. A lot of plants you can just, clip off, use your nail and, take off a little sprig. But with rosemary, you really need a knife if you want to get a full branch. So it's really a tough plant. But it's also very aromatic. And whenever I encounter aromatic plants, there's something about sort of generosity of spirit. I always feel like when a plant gives off these aromas, that there's something, it's communicating to us through our nose, and it has something to say, and it is also the generosity of spirit of just saying, here, like I'm right here, come closer, and then let me share what I have to say with you, not just take my branches, and the plants don't typically say like, take all of my branches and use me, like the giving tree, but they do have this, the aromatic plants do have this way of calling you in and sort of giving you information. We know in aromatherapy that's used all the time for all sorts of emotional and subtle energy problems. We can use those smells. And so I feel like rosemary can speak to us in that way. And I think its main message is wake up. It's like, wake up, make changes, brighten your mind, get moving. And it's also called the flower of loyalty. So I think it also asks us, like, what are you loyal to? What are the things that really matter? And are you taking care of them?
Yeah, really nice. Some of the connections that I'm making astrologically as you're talking, um, you know, we don't often think of Mercury as a generous sign. We think of it as a chatty sign, right? But and that's the Mercury ruled quality of Gemini. Um, but it's actually really important to think that when you're around people that are naturally good at networking, making connections. I'm thinking of some of our friends from the past that connected us. Um, with a lot of good Gemini energy. We had a friend named Erin. We still do. We just haven't seen her for a while, but she has a lot of good Gemini energy in her chart. I think of my best friend growing up, a Gemini sun. There's a way in which the chattiness of Gemini is also you could also understand it or see it as an overflowing of spirit that connects things, like bees, like little busy bees that are going around. And there's a real generosity in that, even though it's not like the regal leonine generosity, like, let me give of my heart to you, like a big lion, like, let me give you something. But Gemini is just kind of overflowing and bubbly. And in that way, it's carried like a scent on the winds. And it's everywhere. Like right now in our neighborhood, we have these little, we joke around, call them spermies, because they're just like these little, pollens that are flying everywhere. And that's what they're doing. They're basically, inseminating. And but they're spreading information at this time of year all over the place. And I was making that connection with Gemini and what you were saying about the aromatic, generous spirit of rosemary.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I think that chatty, I would say that rosemary is quite chatty. It really does have, you just walk by it, you brush it with your hand, and you're like, whoa, you're here. And then it's like, yeah, come back. And bees love it. So, bees, pollinators love rosemary. So they will come back and buzz around and, make quite a commotion when it's in its bloom.
If we think about Mercury retrogrades as times where we might get stuck on something that didn't quite go right, or there was a delay, or something needs to be redone or revised, there couldn't be, a better energy or a way of thinking about the time than what you're describing of rosemary, because it's easier during times when things are breaking down and they aren't working to kind of open yourself up to free flow of, when you're stuck, it's like be open to everything, kind of just open yourself up. And I'll just tell this quick story. So, we're obviously, my wife and I we work together. So Ashley's literally down the hallway from me in the same little sort of area of our house where our offices are. And we've shared office space before when we first got our yoga studio started and stuff like that. So today, Ashley was stuck thinking about what to do for her content for the week. And that's something, I know some of you guys out there are YouTubers, and that if you're a regular content creator, that there's days where it's just like chop wood, carry water. You're not necessarily inspired. You don't necessarily know what to do. And it occurred to me, we were sitting up here kind of chatting and trying to figure out, like, okay, we're under a time crunch. Like, you got to make your content today. What are you going to do? And this is the first day really that we've worked in the same space for a long time. And I think it's really interesting that as soon as that happened, under this very Venus Mercury conjunction that's happening today in Gemini, that all of a sudden it dawned on me. I said, why don't you do something on Mercury retrograde? And then we remembered that in maybe 10 years ago, Ashley had done a talk on rosemary and the connection with Gemini. And I was like, you're so good at talking about rosemary and Gemini. Why don't we do that today? So it was easy. And there's a really beautiful example of, the Venus Mercury combination that's going to be in the air for a little bit yet, Mercury turning retrograde, and just the right kind of spirit to try to handle and shift around with things during this upcoming retrograde. And maybe rosemary could help. So why don't we close? How do people find rosemary? How should they take it? Any recommendations that you have in terms of working with the plant during this time?
You can take it in a lot of different ways. I think the simplest way would just be to find a sprig, either again at your grocery store, if you know anyone that grows it in their garden, and just like nibble on it. Just take a fresh leaf and nibble on it. I mean, that's really delightful. You can also diffuse the essential oil. So you can buy like a little bottle of rosemary essential oil, diffuse it in a candle, in an air diffuser. You can drink it as a tea. It has a lot of tannins, so it's a little bit drying and astringent. So it can kind of tone the tissues, which is nice. And it's also a diuretic, so it helps the kidneys flush. So those are a few kind of medicinal things to be aware of. But as a tea, yeah, you could just do like a teaspoon of the dried herb if you have that in your herb cabinet somewhere. Add that to about a cup of hot water. Add a little bit of honey would be really nice. And then sip on that. And then you can also make a vinegar, which is really fun. And that's one of my ideas for an upcoming video, is how to make an herbal, they call them a shrub, which is a drinking vinegar. So it's actually really good with fruit. So you could make a shrub, which is basically you infuse your herbs. You could take fresh rosemary or dried, infuse that into apple cider vinegar, and then smash and press a bunch of fresh fruit like strawberries and macerate that into sugar and let that sit overnight. And then you combine the liquids from both, and you have this amazing, I don't know if you remember, I made them last summer, and
I do. Yeah,
two
they're
summers
delicious.
ago. Remember that big mason jar?
Mm-hmm.
We would add it to tonic water or sparkling water.
Yeah,
It's just
absolutely delicious. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can do that. And you can look it up, how to make a shrub drink. Otherwise, if it's how to make a shrub, you'll get, all these how to grow bushes. That's not the same thing.
Really, that's what attracted me to you in the very first place, was you were just wandering around in the woods, nibbling on things. I was like, hey, 10 years, 11 years later, you're still nibbling on twigs, and I'm down. I'm game. Oh, I'm just kidding. So yeah, no, the especially though, the last one, a shrub, you called it.
Yeah.
Hands down, the best thing you've made those a few times, but they're so good, man. They're really good. And would you say that, like, even just having some rosemary and, taking a few moments every day to just smell it?
Totally. Yeah, that's a great idea. So you could buy a small plant. You could have the crushed herbs maybe like in a little medicine bowl that you just crush and you sniff several times through the day. I mean, there's so many ways of interacting with plants, and that's something I always encourage my students to do is, you don't necessarily have to make something in order to get the medicinal value. You can just be with the plant. So if you're finding this talk to be really hitting home and it seems like a medicine that might be beneficial, then you can buy a potted rosemary plant and just have it in a sunny window and it will be happy. And you can just walk by and rub its leaves and connect with that, with those medicinal attributes and that Gemini fortifying energy that it has.
It's really sweet. My girls tend to do that. My wife has taught them. So we'll be on walks and they'll just grab, they know lots of plants by names and they'll just go up and touch them and grab them and be like, Mommy, look, it's mullein or whatever it is that we're passing. So these little moments, if you can share them with your kids, if you can share them, as a family, have fun with it. But relating to a symbol in nature that carries some of the gravity of the transit, it's such an easy way to make the whole thing more conscious. Because anytime that we show up with just a little bit of consciousness saying, hey, I want to relate to this in a way that's alive and alert and awake, like Rosemary, it's funny, but like information just starts opening up and coming to us. So thank you for being here today and for talking about Rosemary and for inspiring us with all of your plant wisdom. And for those of you who have followed Ashley and I over the years, that it's been our intention for a while to do more work on planets and plants together. And we just got started with that basically last year and then decided to move and sold our house and then, had to find a house. And so it's been a big transitional space for us, but we're pretty confident that especially now that we have office spaces that are like right connected to one another, that our creative, interplay will be there with planets and plants a lot more in the next year, hopefully. So anyway, thanks for being here. Where can everyone find you? Why don't you tell them where your website is and everything?
Folks can find me on YouTube. I have my own YouTube channel, small and quaint, but sweet. And I try to post content once a week, and that's Skyhouse Herbs, SKYHOUSE Herbs, HERBS. You can also find me on my website, which is skyhouseherbs.com. You can email me at info@skyhouseherbs. I'm also on Instagram under the handle Skyhouse Herbs and also on Facebook. So I'm a little bit everywhere. One closing thing I wanted to say about rosemary is that Shakespeare also said rosemary is for remembrance. And so one thing I was thinking too is that if we can connect with this plant medicine during this retrograde, there may be memories that come forward and solutions, kind of like you pointed to, that come forward, and that this can be sort of a touchstone plant to help us remember the things that we already know. Like you kind of dredged up this idea, you remembered something like, hey, we could talk about this. And the plant was rosemary for remembrance. So I almost feel like this plant also just as a talisman of remembrance is one that we can all use in that way.
Yeah, Rosemary was responsible for this recording, just so that everyone knows.
Yes, sponsored and influenced by Rosemary.
Right on. Well, thank you everybody so much. I hope you guys are having a good Mercury retrograde. Leave some of your comments in the chat box below. Tell me a little bit about how Mercury retrograde is treating you. Tell us a little bit, if you're watching this on Ashley's channel, tell us a little bit about what your experiences have been with rosemary, or if on my channel too, if you've worked with this plant before, or how you use it, or what kind of personality or relationship you have with rosemary. We like reading that kind of stuff. So, all right, that's it for now. Take care, everyone. Bye.